Who exactly is Jesus Christ? I mean, it's the question that's been at the heart of Christianity for 2,000 years. But back in the early church, this was anything but a settled issue. It was a high-stakes theological battlefield, and one of the biggest conflicts was over this one powerful idea: Monophysitism. So, let's get into this because it's a fascinating and absolutely foundational debate about the very identity of Christ.
To really get what's going on here, you've got to picture the early church trying to pull off this incredibly difficult balancing act. The main challenge was, how do you define who Christ is, his divine side and his human side, without falling into some kind of massive error? You tip the scale too far one way or the other, and the entire Christian faith could just, well, it could just fall apart.
And this shows you the two big dangers they were trying to avoid. On one side of the scale, you had Nestorianism. That tipped things way too far towards the human, basically teaching that Christ was two separate persons, a divine person and a human person, just kind of loosely tacked together. And on the other side, tipping the scale way in the opposite direction, was Monophysitism, which put all the emphasis on Christ's divinity.
All right, so let's zoom in on that second error, the one that claimed Christ was, you could say, too divine. This is the whole idea behind Monophysitism, the theory of the one nature. So what in the world did that actually mean?
Well, the name itself is a total giveaway. It comes from these two Greek words, mono, which means single, and physis, which means nature. Put them together, and monophysitism is literally the belief that after the incarnation, after God became man, Jesus Christ had only one single divine nature. The idea was that his humanity got absorbed or changed so much that it wasn't really a distinct nature anymore.
So how did this supposedly happen? Well, the Monophytes had a couple of ways of explaining it. The first was that Christ's divinity was so powerful that it just absorbed his humanity. Think of it like a single drop of honey dissolving into the ocean. The second idea was that the two natures fused together and created something totally new, a kind of hybrid human-divine thing. But here's the bottom line. In either version, the distinct, real, human nature of Christ was gone.
And you've got to remember, this idea didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was actually an extreme overreaction to that other heresy we just talked about, Nestorianism. They were so determined to fight the idea that Christ was two separate people that they swung the pendulum way, way too far in the other direction. They basically erased his true humanity just to protect his unity. Now, this might all sound like some abstract academic argument, but trust me, the implications were huge. The church saw this idea as incredibly dangerous, not just for theology books, but for the very foundation of salvation itself.
And this right here is the heart of the problem, plain and simple. If Jesus Christ wasn't fully and truly human, 100% human, just like us in every way except for sin, then he couldn't really stand in for us. And if he can't represent us, he can't save us. His sacrifice on the cross wouldn't mean what we think it means.
You can see how this creates a terrifying, slippery slope. First, you deny Christ's full humanity. Well, that means he's no longer consubstantial with us. That's a fancy church word that just means he's not of the same stuff as us. And if that's true, it means his perfect human will never healed our broken human will. And the final devastating conclusion? The whole work of salvation just comes undone.
And this wasn't just theoretical. The idea was taken to some really shocking places. A Monophysite patriarch named Peter Fullo actually added this phrase to a famous ancient hymn, "Holy, immortal, who was crucified for us." Think about that. It implies that the divine nature itself, God, the immortal one, suffered and died on the cross. That's a position called patripassatianism, the idea that God the Father suffered, and it completely twists our understanding of the Trinity.
So faced with this massive theological crisis that was threatening to tip the scales in both directions, the church knew it had to do something. It needed to act decisively. It needed to draw a clear, definitive line in the sand to get that balance back.
And that response came through a series of really crucial events. It kicked off in 449 with a famous letter from Pope St. Leo the Great, known as his Tome, which really laid out the theological blueprint. And that paved the way for the big one, the Council of Chalcedon, just 2 years later in 451, which officially condemned Monophysitism as a heresy. The teaching was even fine-tuned centuries later at the Third Council of Constantinople, which tackled the related issue of Christ having two wills.
The absolute core of the Church's answer is captured in this incredibly powerful and precise phrase from the definition of Chalcedon. Christ is to be acknowledged in two natures without confusion, change, division, or separation. Each one of those words, without confusion, change, division, or separation, is like a guardrail, pushing back against both the Monophysite and the Nestorian errors. The natures aren't mixed up, but they're never, ever torn apart.
So this led to the Orthodox formula, the perfect equilibrium that has defined Christian belief ever since. And it's this: Jesus Christ is one single divine person. The Greek word is hypostasis, which means a complete individual substance. And this one person possesses two complete and distinct natures, one that is fully divine and one that is fully human. The scale was finally perfectly balanced.
But you know, the story doesn't just stop in the year 451. The decisions made at Chalcedon actually created a massive rift in the Christian world, and you can still hear the echoes of this ancient debate today.
Yes, several ancient, venerable Christian communities, we often call them the Oriental Orthodox churches, they rejected the definition of Chalcedon. This list includes huge churches like the Coptic Church in Egypt, the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church, just to name a few. All of these churches trace their theological roots back to the groups that disagreed with Chalcedon's formula.
Now, it's really important to get this part right. Despite this deep theological rift, the Catholic Church today recognizes these non-Chalcedonian communities as true churches. It sees them as having apostolic faith and valid sacraments. So the disagreement is very real, but so is the shared ancient heritage, which makes the ongoing dialogue between these churches both delicate and incredibly important.
And this brings us right back to where we started. In the end, this whole massive controversy forced the Church to act like a precision scale. It had to carefully weigh all the evidence from Scripture and tradition, rejecting the Nestorian error that tipped too far to the human side and the Monophysite error that tipped too far to the divine. The goal, always, was to find that perfect, saving balance.
So was this all just an ancient debate about obscure Greek words, or is it really a reflection of a timeless question about how the divine can even interact with the human, a question that plays out not just in theology, but in our own spiritual lives, right? It's a question Chalcedon answered for Christology, but is one that continues to fascinate us to this very day.